Ready?
Yeah. Am I doing this too? Oh, shit. Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is the first episode of the Remind podcast. My name's David Masterton, and beside me, I have the wonderful, the delightful Dr. Ashleigh Moreland. How you going, Ash?
Hey, hey! How awesome! The day is finally here. Episode 1. I'm so excited. David and I have been talking about this for quite some time. It's been in the making for a while now. And we thought we would just start by sharing a bit of our story. What is Remind all about? Why are we doing this show? And what are we hoping for you to get out of it? So I'll start with a bit of my story. And my story begins when I was a child. I was in the mental health system for over 20 years. I had tried every cocktail of medication, every type of therapy you could imagine. I had a nice little collection of labels of diagnoses and all those kinds of things. And I got to the point where really I was just sick of managing. And sure, I just sort of felt like I can't do this anymore. Surely there's more to life than just trying to manage this misery to be able to get through the day. And my background was I have a PhD in neurophysiology and I have a whole entire academic background, but I have a real interest in holistic well-being and applying the principles of neurophysiology to the whole self, because I had scanned a lot of brains, I had zapped a lot of brains, and it occurred to me one day that I had never located a mind. And the definition of mental in mental health is literally relating to the mind. And my mind exploded in that minute. And I thought, oh my gosh, all the pharmacological agents that were used to try and alter my sense of well-being and my mood and my behaviors and thoughts and all those kinds of things were only really affecting the physical physiology of my body. And all the different therapies that I had tried over the years were really talk-based therapies. And when I really started considering from a nervous system perspective, it was kind of like taking a car that had a flat tire to the mechanic for 20 years and the mechanic trying to fix the flat tire by changing the windscreen. The types of therapies that I had been exposed to or been doing over my whole life were really cognitive based and really about understanding thoughts. But trauma, as I began to learn, is stored in the body. So over my own journey with understanding mind, body, spirit, and that holistic self, I have been completely free of all of those labels for years now. I am on no medication. I'm the healthiest that I've ever been. I've overcome other physical manifestations of health issues that arose because of those mind, body, spirit issues. And what we really want to touch on in this show is to be able to give people a relatable source of stories and information and, processes and thought processes and questions to ask themselves to really dive deep into their own experiences so that then they can achieve a life of freedom as well. So I feel really strongly about creating ripple effects. I just love the idea of creating ripple effects, because the thing that I learned in my journey is that when I healed, so too did my children, so too did my parents, so too did the people that I engaged with. And it invited a safe space for them to heal too. And, I see this in workplaces, I see it working with families, I see it in relationships, even just in society. The ripple effect of just a single person doing the inner work and actually doing the hard stuff that resolves the hard stuff, and then being able to relate with and to others peacefully and from a place of really centered, grounded love. So I will share more of my story throughout the show. There'll be lots of reminiscing and lots of, context given, I think, that really helps people understand how we got here. But I think that's a really good starting point. How about you, David?
That was amazing. Thank you, Ash.
Hey.
I now have to follow that. So that's going to be a bit hard.
I love this story. I'm sure everyone else does too.
Well, I'm Mr. David Marston, not Dr. David Marston, but that's okay. I'm a student of life. So for me, where it all sort of started, like everyone, it's our childhood. I was a very logical guy, a very logical kid. Always a doer, I was too busy doing, but not being. When it came to my concepts in mental health in the past, it was simply something that people needed to get over. It was a very logical, very linear way of looking at it. So for myself, I've been going through this process of being a little bit more heart-centered and being able to look at things from a way which is not so much within the mind. Because to me, when you said before, mind, body, spirit, they were words that I understood conceptually, but they didn't really sit. I didn't fully feel it. And so for myself, I've always loved storytelling. I've always loved talking with people. I've always loved taking what I've learned and sharing it. And some people say I'm good at it. Some people think I have an ego as large as Tasmania. But either way, when we bumped into each other that fateful day, which was fantastic, it was about growth. And I was going through a very big, I want to say awakening, but it was more of a realization that while I understood the concepts of what love is in society, it was something that I found very difficult, still very transactional. It was very much about this for that and so forth. How do I show it? How do I break it down? How do I quantify it? And so for my journey has been really moving from that into being someone that is trying to learn how to feel as opposed to thinking your way through things. And so what I'm here to do is to, a bit like yourself, take what I've learned, the mistakes that have happened and all of those type of things, to share it with people, not to try and fix people, but to give them a sense of, number one, they're not alone. This is what worked for me. Maybe give them the encouragement to find what's working for them. And it's this old adage I've heard before: listen to me, but don't believe me. Because when you listen to me, you'll then find out what works for you. And so that's what I'm really excited about. And having your amazing mind, your amazing experiences, your amazing techniques to really bounce off, I'm super excited about.
I'm so excited. And, for everyone listening, David and I go off on these absolutely deep philosophical tangents, and I am holding back with every cell of my body to stick to our plan of just starting by letting you guys know who we are and why we're here in this episode. So we will be deep diving into so many different topics that are relatable and just day-to-day life. So, we are both parents. So we will be deep diving into our early life experiences and how that's impacted us throughout our lives, and that the trauma, both the big T trauma and the little t trauma, if you're not familiar with those terms, you will be, we'll get there, that we experienced in our early life, and then how we've had to overcome that, but also how we then translate that into the way in which we relate with and to our children, and doing that from a conscious, highly aware perspective that is really intentional about how we're raising our kids and what they're going to grow up believing about the world and believing about themselves and their potential. And that's one aspect. David and I are both people who have been divorced. We've had multiple marriages each. So we have the lived experience of relationship failure, and also the process of learning relationship with ourselves as the solid foundation for any subsequent relationship that comes. And so we'll be deep diving into relationships as well. We're both business owners, so there's that aspect of ourself, and we will deep dive into how the aspects of ourself impact and influence the success or failures of our business, or the success and learning opportunities of our businesses. Don't believe in failures.
Yeah.
So, and then I want to dive into, labels. I feel like this labeling of ADHD and ASD and anxiety and depression and all of these labels that simply describe an experience of life, but fail to actually go any deeper and explain why we're experiencing life in that way. So we want to dive really deep into that. So there's so much
absolutely.
we want to get into in this show, and I can't wait. I really
It's going to be
can't wait.
fascinating because even, for those listening to the podcast, you'll see that if you go to YouTube, which this will be uploaded, you'll see my name, David Marston. Underneath it, it's my title. Today, it's going to be Old Mate, right? Next week, it might be something else and things like that. And what I love about that is because what the things that I've learned and just going through my journey is what is trauma. And I know I have to be very careful here because when I start talking about this, Ashleigh's going to absolutely go into a mad flow. It's going to be great. But I'll just give a small example that when I thought about trauma, it had to be a big traumatic thing that I've seen, like on a movie, let's just say Die Hard, right? That's traumatic, as opposed to the small things. And we're going to explore those type of concepts.
Yeah.
We also want to explore the concepts where it's about, okay, so how do we release these things? Well, for me, it started with having to be vulnerable, right? It's just that picking away at the edge of a sticker. And then it's sort of about how do we find connection and why is connection so important? And then how does connection interrelate with things such as being vulnerable, right? As Ashleigh so eloquently pointed out, I have been a figure of a couple of marriages so far. So a lot of these things that I'm learning now have, with the absence of those in the past have been because of that. So we're going to dive into many different aspects. So it's going to be relationships, it's going to be life events, it's going to be broader terms when it comes to about connection and vulnerability and all of these things. So it's going to be super stoked, which is a lovely segue into Remind. I mean, it's a great name, but there's actually there's an institute behind that, Ashleigh, if you just want to share
there's a deeper meaning. If you're watching our YouTube channel, you will notice the logo, and the logo is extremely intentional, and I'd love to share a little bit about how we came up with that. So this is the masterpiece of David with a little bit of input from me. So as I shared, my expertise is as a neurophysiologist, and my expertise began with understanding the brain and the human nervous system. So I personally am an expert in nervous system and nervous system regulation. And so the two purple bits represent the two hemispheres of the brain. Now, the two hemispheres of the brain are kind of joined together by this structure called the corpus callosum. And the corpus callosum would sit around about where the two green triangles are. So the two green triangles represent the corpus callosum, the thing that joins the two hemispheres. But you'll also notice that those two triangles are in the shape of a rewind button, because we acknowledge that who we are today is the direct product of every experience that we have had that up until this point. But not only that, it's every experience of our ancestors, every experience of this intergenerational pattern and programming. So rewind is all about acknowledging our past, acknowledging the past of our ancestors and how that's even influenced us at a DNA level. And the remind is inspired by actually a biblical verse, which is do not conform to this world, but to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And one of the things that I'd learned through all of my research around the nervous system, as I mentioned earlier, is that the answer is not just the nervous system. You have to be able to have an understanding of the mind, because the mind is not a physical structure. It doesn't exist in any anatomical textbook. You can't locate it in any scans. But the mind is an emergent property of the experiences of the nervous system. And so if we have experiences of the nervous system that are scary, or experiences of the nervous system that are uncertain, for example, something as simple as growing up in a household where the energy of the home felt like you were walking on eggshells, that is really activating for the nervous system. Now, no one would look at that and go, oh, gee, my childhood was so traumatic because it was a bit unpredictable. People don't think like that. But the nervous system had an experience which then created an emergent property of that experience that led to belief systems that maybe I'm not safe, or maybe I'm not important, or no one listens to me when I talk, or whatever those belief systems might be. So the truth is, all of those belief systems that we have in our mind that actually hold us back, or that are driven by fear. Now, that could be fear of judgment, fear of being alone, fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of letting people down, fear of not being good enough. I'm covered in goosebumps because I'm describing my previous mind to you right now. And the reality is, the nervous system is just like a computer. It's going to produce some output. It's going to do some outcomes, right? But what the product of those outcomes in our life is behaviors and thoughts and actions is entirely dependent on the code. It's entirely dependent on the input to the nervous system. Now, the input to our nervous system is our mind. So unless we renew our mind, we cannot change the function of the nervous system in a tangible way. And I'm not going to go down the hole of neuroplasticity today. We'll get there. But that is the key to then understanding how to change our behaviors, how to change our thoughts, how to change the feeling that we get in our body when someone doesn't respond to a text message, or, when our children are fighting in public, or something like that, So that's really the story behind our logo. And it's really meaningful to me. It's really meaningful to me because when you can tie together, now this is a whole other element to it, but I spoke earlier about mind, body, and spirit. Mind often is constituted by a whole lot of lies and a whole lot of deceptions, and is actually driven by fear a lot of the time. As I already mentioned, that whole list of fear. So the mind is more related as an identity of ego, whereas spirit is truth. So this is the difference between what we know to be true, but what we believe to be true because of those lies and distortions in our mind. It's fascinating stuff.
Wow. So old mate over here, I just love that when you flow in these sort of conversations, what comes out, it's incredible. But if I had to put it into some more simple terms, it's sort of like things that happen when we're younger creates a patterning within us that then whenever we sense a similar thing in the future, it triggers that same the same sense of trying to protect us from the situation when we were younger, even though that may not be happening right now, but we perceive and that's what we'll sort of talk about in the future, maybe being triggered. And then from there, when we talk about what is triggering us right now is actually something that's now at play from something that happened to us beforehand, whether it was last week, last month, at birth, whatever it is, intergenerational. And so that's why, you called it a really sort of funny scientific name, the rewind buttons. I'm just calling them the rewind buttons. We're sort of going back to heal those those things that have happened back then, so that when you are in the present, when you're in the moment right now, you're not triggered by what's at play from something else, especially when you've ever been told you're overreacting. Why are you
Yes.
reacting? All of this
Yes.
type
Or
of
if something that's like a 2 out of 10 happens, but it feels like a 20 out of 10.
which is exactly right, because it is a 20 out of 10. It's just
It
that
feels it.
the
Yeah.
input has then been, the 2 has then been met with another 18.
Yeah.
So,
The 18 that's already in storage, right? From our past.
correct.
Yeah,
Correct.
exactly.
So,
And that's so massive.
And so that's what we're going to be sort of going through. And I also love the fact you sort of touched on, something out of the Bible. And look, for everyone listening, we are going to be touching on subjects like that, whether it be, in the Bible, whether it be spirituality and all of those things, because at the end of the day, everyone's got what's called intuition. Old mate over here, myself, is going to call it gut feeling. So anyone who doesn't have a gut feeling, then this simply won't be for you. For those that have a gut feeling,
I'm going to interrupt you there. I'm going to call banana on that, because if you don't have a gut feeling, this is absolutely even more important for you, because it means that you are disconnected from your sense of true self. So if you don't have intuition that you can rely on, if you don't have those gut feelings, if you are operating from a sense of just complete chaos and overwhelm and fear, it's even more important that you listen along and follow along for this show. Subscribe,
even more.
follow, wait for updates. Yeah.
All right. Well, I accept your banana. I'm not that hungry. I might make a smoothie with it later on. But that's even brilliant. So that's why we're here. That's a little bit about me. It's a little bit about Ash. A little bit about the show itself. But did you want to just maybe sort of touch on the Remind Institute, which is this part of it sort of covered over that umbrella of the Remind Institute?
Yeah, so this is kind of like a little bit of a love child of the Remind Institute. And the Remind Institute is something that I founded where it's a different approach to changing your life. What we do is not like anything that is out there. And I know that because I tried just about everything over 20 years. And it was really important to me that we had an option for people to go to that really disrupted the industry. I think the mental health industry in so many ways is failing us. It creates customers and it creates codependence. And what the Remind Institute is really about is empowering people to no longer be a customer, but to be so integrated and so self-assured and so prepared and so well equipped that they don't need therapy anymore. And what we do is, as I already mentioned, we are experts in nervous system regulation, but we do that in a really holistic way where we bring in our expertise in mind and mental components, but also our expertise in spirituality as well. So the 3 core pillars of the Remind Institute is awareness, education, and transformation. Now, in our YouTube channel, podcast, wherever you're joining us today, you're going to be getting tons of awareness and education throughout our episodes. And really what awareness is about is that every single one of us has blind spots in the way that we unconsciously think, act, behave, just the way that we exist. But those blind spots influence our daily lives, and it influences us at work. It influences us in the way that we navigate our children, parenting. It influences us in our health behaviors. We might, just a perfect example, I had something come into my awareness just over the weekend. My husband had gone away for work and my children weren't home. And I went looking for chocolate or for like some kind of junk food, which is not a behavior that I typically engage in. And so that allowed me to be curious and go, what's going on for me right now? And I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole and give you the answer. We'll talk about it at a later date. But that's a perfect example. It'll affect you in the way that you study, in your work habits. It'll affect you in leadership and the way that you run your business. So there is really no one that this is not for, except those who are too unconscious to receive it. So if you have an open enough mind to really want to get to know your true self and to be a better version of you, then absolutely continue to follow along, because moving then into the education component, we'll deep dive into really understanding the mechanisms that drive our thoughts, actions, and behaviors. And that is particularly important relationally. And people think that a relationship is just with a romantic partner. That's not the case, because we even have relationships with our mobile phone. We have relationships with chocolate, clearly. We have relationships with all kinds of aspects, whether it's people, things, places even. So we're going to be deep diving, and the Remind Institute is then an option for people to go to if through that awareness and through that education, they're then ready for transformation. And transformation is where we really get to process. It's where we really get to hold you to be able to process those past traumas. And I put in here principal soul seeker. And what I got this vision of, when you have something that's really special to you, but your hands are full, you might be holding it, right? Because you don't want to break that thing, you don't want to drop it, you don't want to lose it, you might pass that to someone else so that you can safely complete the work that you need to do. And that other person holds that thing with absolute reverence. And that's what I see through the Remind Institute. I really see that we hold space. We hold such a safe, sacred container for people to go to the depths of their hurt, to go to the depths of their shame, of their trauma, of their fear, and transcend it. I've got goosebumps. I don't know if anyone else does. That's why I was.
I just love your flow. I know I've said it a few times, and you will hear me say it again. I'm just going to come back and sort of everything that you've been sort of saying is sort of like really what we're going to be doing is taking or helping people when they've identified where they are, and then they identifying where they want to be. Because normally in between those two things, there's some limiting beliefs. There's something holding them back. There's something that is essentially triggering them, which then stops them from moving forward. Or, and that the way that comes across is people are treating them unfairly, things are coming up on all of these type of things. And what we're going to do is talk about the actual how.
Yeah.
Yes, you are here. You want to be here, and we can give you the tips and the clues and all of those. Close the gap. And even to a point where we'll even deep dive into things where, you know what, I don't know exactly where I am, but I don't like where I am.
Yes.
So I want to move that as well.
Yeah.
We'll also dive into all of that.
Yeah.
And because a lot of people I talk to, so like, this is great, David. I'm either depressed, I'm unhappy, I'm traumatized, I've been abused, and all of that. And this all sounds wonderful. How do we get there? Well, it's going to be here's some of the processes or methods that we use. Try those. Yeah. And the one common thing I'll say to everybody, and one thing from my experience, and I'm sure Ash will give me a banana if it's not her experience as well, is going to be, it's simple, but also difficult. And the difficulty is overcoming those feelings, those triggers, the trauma and emotion. But the techniques are simple. I can guarantee you. So you don't need to be a rocket scientist. Stick along for the ride. We'll hold you.
I absolutely love that. I
love that. Only one banana for this show? Okay, all right.
One banana.
One banana.
Yeah. So, guys, we really are so grateful that you've chosen to tune in. And our next episode is going to start with a foundation of who am I? Who is self? So we're going to start with a big topic because, as I already mentioned, we have these identities. We can over-identify with the mind that's like the ego, fear-driven version of us that's producing a lot of thoughts that are just lies and deceptions. but there is actually a calm, centered truth. Your soul self, the truth of who you are, that maybe you just have never met.
And I'd guarantee that when you're in the middle of your fight and flight, right? And I know it's, a nervous system thing and all of that. It's very hard to zoom out.
Yeah.
To see, right? And I guess that's, especially with my camera doing that every time I move my hands. When you zoom out, and that's the reason why we start there. And that's why it's really important, as opposed to why am I feeling depressed? How do I fix this trauma? These are very much what's right in front of me. Be patient with us, stick with us. What we're doing is we're zooming out, right?
Yeah.
So we can sort of lay down some groundwork, a foundation to then put the pieces together. And so when we start from that, as opposed to trying to direct hit one particular issue, that will come over time within a foundation of the method, which Ash is amazing at. So guys, well, Ashleigh, firstly, thank you very much. This has been awesome. I love it. Love the color scheme. Love the t-shirts. They are bling. And I'm absolutely looking forward to the next episode. And until next time, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.